Pokémon has never been a series to hide away from the complex nature of the world that they're representing. Players can find Pokédex entries narrating the tales of war, spirits, and gods creators of the universe. I have always thought that there is an underlying dark awareness of the more disturbing notions that Game Freak puts into their games. Players aren't simply presented with, say, ghost-type Pokémon. They're also introduced to the different terrifying ways in which they are created, like dolls being haunted by spirits, or beings made of the essence of nightmares. And it is on that note that we must consider the advent of artificial Pokémon. Welcome to Rebel Culture, where we talk about the dark and unexplained parts of fictions and video games, like what is the nature of Giratina as the god of the Pokémon world, or the apocalyptic future of the Paradox forums. If you're interested in those topics, stick around and consider subscribing to this channel. But with all of that being said, let's get back into the video. In the Pokémon world, there are some beings born through the process of human genetic engineering, be them directly developed in a lab, product of advanced technologies like artificial intelligence, which brought Porygon to the world, or biological meddling, which brought into the world one of the most powerful beings on the planet, Mewtwo. A large majority of the beings in the Pokémon world are, much like in our world, product of the blinded arrow of evolution, meaning in this case the Darwinian evolution, not the in-game ability of some mons to turn into even stronger versions of themselves. In Generation 4, we're also made privy to the creation myth, by which the great first moving force that brought the universe into motion and was likely responsible for the creation of life is said to be a godly being named Arceus. Therefore, these artificial beings remain exceptions in the eyes of this machine of biological and celestial creation. It is important to mention that when we refer to man-made Pokémon, I don't include versions of all Pokémon brought to the present, as it might be the case with the fossil Pokémon that are brought into the present with advanced machines of genetic reconstruction based on DNA found in those fossils, nor the past Paradox forms we are presented with in Scarlet and Violet, since those are only in the present Paldea due to Professor Sada's meddling with a time machine. Artificial Pokémon, at least in this context, are those that are brought into being by selfish desires of humans, like the creation of Mewtwo made to replicate the legendary Pokémon Mew by the scientists at Cinnabar Isle, or the advent of the Beast Killer project at the Aether Foundation in Alola, that brought to life a deficient imitation of Almighty Arceus by means of genetic replication called Type Null. These beings are never coy about their affronts towards nature that these acts entail. No player, no matter how young, can watch the first Pokémon movie about Mewtwo's creation, nor read about the botched experiments in the abandoned manor of Cinnabar Isle, and believe Mewtwo to be a happy incorporation to the Pokédex. These scientists, be them the Aether Foundation in Alola, the future architects of the Paradox Pokémon of Paldea, or the company behind the creation of Porygon, are always seen as the bad guys, as having committed some sort of terrible sin against the natural order, or at least against the plan set out by Arceus in the beginning of the universe. In our world, the pressure of nature and the mutations that result in evolutionary advantages allow animals to occupy what many biologists call natural niches, or areas in an ecosystem that ensure their survival. Bees occupies the role of pollinizers not because they're just very helpful beings enamored with floral biodiversity, but rather because they evolved to be able to extract nectar out of flowers, and their hair in their legs can carry pollen to other flowers. Much in the same way, evolutionary pressures and the effects of the climate push Shelter and Slowpoke to pair up and engage in symbiotic collaboration, resulting in the being composite of both entities named Slowbro. But these artificial Pokémon are born without a natural niche to occupy, essentially being thrown into the current biological history without a single direction as to where they belong. In the first Pokémon movie, the first thoughts of Mewtwo as he is brought into existence are those of absolute agony, of a being with enough intelligence to ponder its place in the universe, but a complete clean slate of biological history to guide its actions. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us and let us know that you enjoy this kind of content. But now, let's get back to the video. Mewtwo is also constantly disturbed by the unresolved notions of his roles in the universe. I think to fully understand the philosophical stance that Pokémon takes when it comes to criticizing the scientific organizations that seek to develop new Pokémon, we must go back to the existential philosophers of the 20th century. Existentialism is a branch of modern philosophy that developed out of the powerful impact that industrialization and the horrors of the First World War had in Europe. Philosophers like Albert Camus or Friedrich Nietzsche pondered the nature of existence of humankind in a natural world that largely lost any semblance of objective notion of meaning. Albert Camus talked about the two greatest opposing forces in the human experience, the constant striving for meaning of humankind and the universe's utter disregard for existential angst. Nietzsche, adding to this argument, famously said that God had been killed by the advances in technology that had sucked the mysticism and magic from our world, without removing our need for them. In other words, the diminished power of the divine to explain our role in the world had not necessarily just freed ourselves from the tyranny of institutions like the church, but it had also left the average Westerner without any values to call their own. We had killed God, but its throne in our minds remained empty. Mewtwo overtly shows signs of the same existential dread that disturbed the existentialists. As he becomes self-aware, and as his lack of biological history and family is explained, he rages against his creators, destroying the life where he was made. Mewtwo then seeks his creator, who in the movie is shown to be Giovanni, the boss of Team Rocket, and briefly agrees to follow his commands in return for a modicum of meaning. By acting as a pawn to Giovanni's ambitions, Mewtwo seems to resolve the dilemma of existentialism. None of us are born with a destiny in mind, but we can carry ourselves with the artificial meaning that we might derive from work. But then Mewtwo is tortured by the second question of existentialism. Once you realize the natural meaninglessness of the world, it is up to you to construct your own values and derive meanings from a regimented following of those values. Mewtwo realizes that under the shadow of Giovanni, he is inheriting values that are not his own, becoming once again a pawn in someone else's philosophical beliefs. He does not care about the ever-growing glory and power of Team Rocket, so he decides to leave and wander the world to find his identity. A misunderstood notion many people have about the existentialists is that they were gloomy people, constantly talking about the meaninglessness of it all. But this is incorrect. Both Camus and Nietzsche never argued in favor of disappearing in the face of a nihilistic universe, but rather used the inherent lack of values in the world to encourage the creation of new values. Essentially, they asked people to supplant the absent God of their minds with a modern set of values that were not just great for being written in a Bible, but because they were born from careful exploration of their existence. Mewtwo sought the freedom of thought that the existentialists consider a prerequisite to address a meaningless world. Camus even wrote against the authoritarian figures that sought to give you their values and ask you not to question them. He said that the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Mewtwo is the vivid representation of this existential belief, as he uses his lack of a natural niche to negate any barrier put upon him by either Giovanni, his creators, or the entire Pokémon world. He refuses to serve a trainer as a mere tool as he did with Giovanni. He even refuses the basic compact between Pokémons and humans in their world, defining himself both as the strongest Pokémon to ever exist and as the strongest Pokémon trainer by fighting with an army of his peers, clone Pokémon derived from the teams of trainers invited to a tournament in his island. Mewtwo embodies the very heart of positive existentialism, using the cloth of a meaningless cosmos to weave a self-sustaining identity that remains unperturbed from biological commands, societal expectations, and submissive roles. After facing Mew towards the end of the movie, he is presented with the epiphany that we were talking about today and goes on to formulate a synthesis that would be at home in one of the existentialist texts. I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. Mewtwo then departs the island with his army of clone Pokémon to wander the world anew, and constantly questioned his newly forged values, and never compromising in his intent to find the purpose that was not given to him by neither nature nor his creators. Mewtwo is a fascinating character who is constantly learning his place in the universe, from a recently born infant that rages violently against his creators for the lack of obvious purpose in his life, to a mature being forced to confront the corrupt forces of our world that wish to take your identity and sink their ideology like roots into your soul, as it is the case with Giovanni, to a true self-standing being that refuses that which unnecessarily limits their existence and accepts that seeking truth is an infinite game. I will leave you with one final quote by Albert Camus that greatly encapsulates the existential exploration that Mewtwo goes through. "Blessed are the hearts that bend, for they shall never be broken." Thank you for watching Rebel Culture. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and consider subscribing. We have tons of content that you might enjoy, so check out some of the videos in your screen right now. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.